Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and this is my preview of the newly announced Olympus E-M5 Mark II. We're going to have a full review coming soon. This is a technical review going over the specifications, comparing it to other cameras, kind of looking at some sample images and making early determinations about the value of the camera and whether it might be right for you. We are taking live questions, and I'll be answering them. You can throw comments on Twitter too. Use the hashtag TCLive. The producer, Justin, will throw them up on the screen if he finds them interesting. And if you have any questions, I'll review them at the end and do my best to answer them. You're also welcome to ask me for specific things to review during our upcoming real-world review of the E-M5 Mark II. This is just a sample shot of it. It comes in two varieties, both the silver and the black version, and you can tell that I prefer this version with silver. And this is my preference on the EM1 and EM10 as well. Also cameras that I really like. I just find it to be more stylish, and you might as well have a camera that looks nice, right? This is the top view. You see that the EM5 Mark II has a lot of custom function buttons, and that's something that I really liked about the EM1. This allows you to quickly jump to different functionality. Unlike the bigger DSLRs, it doesn't have a top LCD display, but it does have a very nice display on the back and a touchscreen as well, as you can see here. Unlike the EM1 and EM10, the articulating touchscreen flips out from the side. This is definitely my preference. The other screens tilt up or tilt down. The tilt screen is useful for holding the camera low or above your head, but the fact that it tilts out from the side allows you to flip it forward so that you can get a selfie, take a group shot, helps with recording yourself for videos as well. This is just a sample shot to show you how it fits into your hand. It's a fairly hefty camera, and in fact, it's right about the same size as this A7 that we also really like. The Olympus is weatherproofed, and that's kind of the hallmark of the Olympus lineup. Now, I don't know how many people are going to be taking a shower with their Olympus, but I have gotten caught in the rain with my 5D Mark II and Mark III before, and the rain absolutely killed them. So if you get stuck in really bad conditions and you don't have, say, a plastic bag with you, as happened to me, it was a flash flood, then it definitely can ruin your camera. Now, this weatherproofing is only going to work for you if you happen to use one of the weather-sealed lenses as well, so you can't just go slapping on any one of the wide variety of micro four thirds lenses and expect to take advantage of it. Olympus also announced a vertical grip for the camera, a battery grip. This will help extend the life if you get the one that also has the battery in it, because it does indeed have a very short battery life. They say, according to Olympus, that it will run out after about 300 pictures, and in my experience with both the EM1 and the EM10, the battery life is a real problem. It's the kind of camera you want to take with you on vacation, and it runs out of batteries right around like noon or 1 o'clock in my experience. Well, if you want to get a micro four thirds camera, you usually do it because they're small, but if you want it to be even bigger, I suppose that's an option. These aren't for me, but they're right for some people. I'll go over some of the key features of the new camera. First of all, the feature I'm most excited about is 40 megapixel mode. And what this does, what they call the high resolution mode, is it uses sensor shift technology to move the sensor in 8 different places. So the first thing that it will do is it will slide left or right and just exactly 1 pixel to the side. And this changes the way the Bayer filter is arranged so that the green pixels, for example, will now be where the red pixels were. This gives you much more accurate color, and as well as increasing depth. And then the sensor will also shift between pixels. So basically you're picking up an extra pixel between other pixels, and it's turning the fairly low resolution 16 megapixel sensor into a capable 40 megapixel sensor, producing raw images with a resolution of 9,200 pixels wide. That's bigger than even the mighty D810. And DP Review, a website, you should definitely check out their overview of the EM5 Mark II. They have a lot of great information. These are sample pictures from them, and you can see the 40 megapixel picture on the left there. It definitely shows substantially more detail than the standard 16 megapixel picture on the right. Here's a sample picture comparing the EM5 on the left to the D810 on the right. Now, this is a picture taken in a lab environment. And I think it's pretty remarkable that the fairly inexpensive EM5 looks sharper than the much more expensive 36 megapixel D810. So it does seem like the sensor shift technology, there's something real to it. Now, I will warn you, this is not a mode for snapshots. You cannot just pick up the camera and take a 40 megapixel picture. You're going to need to mount the camera to a tripod. It needs to be on a tripod, and in fact, it has a delayed shutter so that you can press a shutter and the camera won't shake, and then it will move it all around. You cannot hope to get handheld pictures. If there are any moving subjects, you're going to get artifacts of that movement because it is taking multiple images and stacking them together. Another one of the effects of stacking multiple images, besides increasing the resolution, is decreasing the noise and increasing the color depth. So you're really getting much higher quality images. This is a technology we've only seen on medium format cameras before. I'm really, really excited to see it in any camera, especially an affordable camera, and especially a micro 4/3 camera because, well, I'll get to that in a minute. This is another sample of the E-M5 on the left and the D810 on the right. Now the D810 does not have an anti-aliasing filter. This helps increase the sharpness of the sensor, but it also increases artifacts. And the samples that DP Review surfaced on the front pages of the review really show that the D810 has some significant artifacts. And looking at these two, to me, the E-M10 or E-M5 Mark II looks substantially better, right? Because it doesn't have all these weird artifacts. Here's another sample that I pulled from their sample images, and you can see from the text, the D810 just looks terrible. The E-M5 Mark II, again, smaller, less expensive camera, looks far better. It's a really interesting technology. And it raises the question, is the E-M5 Mark II the ultimate landscape camera? It's small, it's lightweight, it's portable, it has access to the entire wide range of micro 4/3 lenses, which are just a spectacular lineup. So it's easy to travel with, and according to these first few images, it looks like it produces better pictures than the D810. But I decided to dig into DP Review's files a little bit deeper, pulling some of my own comparison shots from their images. And again, it's the E-M5 on the left and the D810 on the right. And to my eye, this is one of their sample shots from DP Review. The right image is far, far sharper from the D810 than the E-M5 Mark II. So it begs the question, why do these pictures look so much better on the E-M5, but this picture looks so much better on the D810? And the real answer is that this part of their test chart is designed to show these sorts of artifacts that you see on the D810. This is not a real world picture. You do see artifacts in things like brick buildings or fine cloth that has some sort of texture to it. The artifacts do come up in the real world, but they're not this pronounced and they're not this common. So when you're looking at these sort of test charts, the E-M5 Mark II suddenly looks way better than a much bigger camera. But when you start to look at real world images, I think the D810 definitely looks sharper and overall much better. Here's another sample shot right away to my eyes. The D810 shows a great deal more image. I encourage you to go to DP Review, and you can actually download their raw files, process them yourself, and check it out. So make your own decisions. But for me, I don't think the E-M5 is going to displace my D810 anytime soon. This is the closest I could find to a landscape image in their test chart. It's just a close-up of some fake plants. But again, as you look at them side by side, the D810, right away, you don't have to study it. It looks way sharper, way more contrasty. Now, of course, they couldn't use the same lenses. They used the Olympus 45mm f1.8, which I'm being filmed on right now, in fact, on a GH2, and an 85mm on the Nikon. So similar lenses, but there could be differences in the quality. I am happy with the Olympus lens, though. But there's no way to say that the E-M5 Mark II beats the D810 if you go deeper and you look at more real-world sample images. But when you start looking at test charts, yes, it does look better, but don't be too deceived by it. So I don't think the E-M5 Mark II is the ultimate landscape camera, but I definitely appreciate that suddenly for an $1,100 camera, you can start to get much, much better images. And Olympus has done something amazing, and they have taken the image quality way up above what you were able to get with any micro 4/3 camera before. You just have to be willing to carry a tripod with you and set it up and take the picture, and you have to make sure there are no moving subjects. But for many of us, those are sacrifices we make anyway, especially if you're a landscape photographer. So maybe it's not the ultimate landscape camera at any price, but it's an excellent landscape camera and probably the best landscape camera under $2,000. We'll do some thorough testing in our real world review, so subscribe to see that. Another feature which is kind of a staple of the Olympus line is 5-axis in-body image stabilization. Well, the E-M10 has 3-axis stabilization. The E-M1 also has 5-axis stabilization. And instead of putting the stabilization in the lens, it moves the sensor around to counteract hand movement. Works for both still images and video. For still images, this basically gives you cleaner images. You could say it eliminates camera shake, but what it allows you to do is to shoot at a slower shutter speed handheld. When you shoot at a slower shutter speed, you can use lower ISOs, producing cleaner images. So that's why I say it's really a noise reduction feature. For video, it will give you smoother movement if you're hand holding during video. In their marketing material, they kind of advertise that now suddenly you don't need a gimbal or a Steadicam or a tripod for video. It doesn't work that way. We have tried IBIS on the A7 and the E-M1 and the E-M10 for video, and it helps, but it's not a Steadicam. The standard sensor, without using high-res mode, if you're just hand holding it, it's 16 megapixels, which is basically what every Micro Four Thirds camera has. I don't know why they all have exactly the same sensor. They also seem to have the same ISO range, starting at a base ISO of ISO 200. That's something I'm really disappointed in, that they don't drop that ISO down and allow us to get cleaner images. It's also weather sealed, as we mentioned. The frame rate is 10 frames a second for still images, but the camera at that frame rate cannot autofocus. So if you're tracking a moving subject, it's 5 frames a second. And so you have to kind of change the focusing mode and adjust the maximum number of frames per second in the camera itself. It's not an easy kind of switch to make. The 10 frames a second is still useful. For example, when I'm shooting my daughter's softball games, I always try to get her at that moment when the bat hits the ball, but this happens in just a split second. I would love to have 60 frames a second. That would definitely increase my odds of getting that whack. But 10 frames a second helps, and it does not need to autofocus at that point. But when she's running from home to first base, well, I'm going to need some focus tracking at that point, and I'm going to have to drop down to 5 frames a second. The maximum mechanical shutter speed is 1/8,000th of a second, but it also has an electronic shutter. That's an absolutely silent shutter, and it's one of my favorite features of mirrorless cameras in general. I use my GH4 for stills all the time, and if you're in a church, someplace you don't want to disturb people doing street photography, an electronic shutter is a great feature that I wish we could get in DSLRs. Well, a silent electronic shutter, that is. Olympus bumped the video capabilities up to 1080p 60 frames a second and provided a higher quality codec. Basically, you'll be able to get higher quality video out of it, though we have some samples that might contradict that. They also added focus peaking. Focus peaking outlines a subject that is sharp when you're trying to focus, and it's better than nothing. It's not perfect, though. I can't tell you how many shots I've shot with focus peaking where I went back and looked at the final images and realized I actually missed focus. I miss focus with focus peaking all the time. It highlights more than the area that is precisely in focus. So again, when you have to manually focus or you're shooting video, it's very helpful. It's better than nothing, but it's not perfect. The new camera offers clean HDMI out, which means if you want to run it in a studio environment like we are now, you'll have that option, or you can use an external HDMI recorder, though I don't know that it's necessarily providing better quality video that way. Probably more for studio environments. It finally has an external mic input, so you can get some better quality sound out of it, but it does not have a headphone jack. So you can record better quality sound, but you can't necessarily listen to it to make sure that the mic isn't scratching on somebody's jacket or the wind isn't blowing in it. It's a weird nod that they made towards improving video capabilities, but not providing a headphone jack. Here's some stills, again provided by DP Review. I highly suggest you check out their review. Showing a still from video on a GH4 against the E-M5 Mark II, and I assume these are both taken at 1080p. You can see the GH4's video is substantially better here. GH4s are one of our favorite video cameras, and they are kind of optimized for that. So the E-M5 Mark II doesn't hang with that. In my opinion, it also doesn't hang with the Alpha 6000 or the Sony A7, this camera, which is about the same price range. So good for video, but I'm not going to be telling people to buy it specifically for the video capabilities. Earlier I discussed the articulating screen, terribly useful. It also has a touch screen, which is something we don't see on many other cameras. I wish we saw it on every camera. It's one of the most useful features, especially for those shooting video. You can just touch to focus on a different part of the subject. It has an interval timer, which has become standard in all new cameras nowadays, and it has Wi-Fi. A moderately useful feature, but it's good on vacation if you want to get something to your phone and just upload it to Facebook real quick. The E-M5 Mark II is shipping February 27th, 2015. If you want to pre-order it, you can give us a few bucks by ordering it from sdp.io/em5ii, like 2. I'm going to take a quick moment and plug my books, Stunning Digital Photography, which is our instructional book showing you how to take great pictures, teaching you photographic techniques. If you're interested in post-processing, Adobe Lightroom is the place to start. It's the standard app that all the pros and amateurs use, and I have a book with over 12 hours of video and access to a private support group. And finally, if you're interested in gear, I wrote a whole bunch about it. It's a big, thick book that covers all sorts of lenses, cameras, flashes, studio lighting, just about everything you can imagine. All these come with a money-back guarantee. If you're not happy with it, you can get them all for under 10 bucks at sdp.io/store. Available in both paperback and ebook. So I want to cover a couple of disappointments with this camera before we go to the Q&A. First, Micro Four Thirds cameras really need to get that base ISO lower because many of us, especially shooting landscapes or anytime you're shooting outdoors in sunlight, you're going to use that base ISO. And even at the base ISO, these Micro Four Thirds cameras have noticeable noise. That's because of the sensor size. ISO 200 behaves very similar to ISO 800 on a full-frame camera. And ISO 800 always has noticeable amounts of noise, especially in solid colors like the blue sky. And it gets to be distracting. So I wish they would get that ISO down. I'd like to see ISO 50, ISO 25, but they're actually higher than full-frame cameras. Also, there's no 4K. They kind of added a bunch of video features. They want the people to consider this a capable video camera, but there's no 4K. And it's been almost a year since the GH4 with 4K was announced, and we haven't really seen another Micro Four Thirds camera with 4K. And I would love to get the combination of the Olympus IBIS with the Panasonic 4K, because that would allow me to stabilize fast primes for Micro Four Thirds cameras, shoot handheld with smooth video, but using something like the 45mm f1.8 to work in low light. It's not really possible right now. There's still no phase detection focus. They have not improved the focusing system. Really, the Micro Four Thirds cameras are the only mirrorless cameras coming out now that don't have phase detect focus. They still use only contrast-based focusing. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. It's a real problem if you use fast prime lenses, which is what I recommend on these systems so that you can keep that ISO as low as possible. If you're working with shallow depth of field, like the 75mm f1.8 that we have on the camera over here, if you're working with shallow depth of field, the contrast-based focusing I found doesn't tend to be that precise. It also tends to be very slow, and using it for moving subjects, forget about it. It's going to be a problem. Finally, there's no GPS in it. Something I like to see. It's still using USB 2. I love USB 3 on cameras. It allows me to offload pictures much, much faster. They did advertise that this supports tethering, but tethering over USB 2 is pretty painful. So give us USB 3 finally. No headphone jack, still only 16 megapixels, and the battery life actually got a little worse since the E-M5 Mark II. 310 pictures is not enough for the types of photography that I do on vacation. That means you have to buy an extra battery, keep it charged. When you get back to your hotel room, you have to try to charge both batteries. I could even go through 2 batteries pretty quickly. As far as I know, they didn't add USB charging to it. That's something the Sony cameras offer. Means that you could charge your camera in the same way you charge your cell phone. You can carry around a little USB battery and keep it charged as you go. Anyway, battery life is a real problem when you're on the go with these cameras. I want to remind you that we're live Thursdays at 5 p.m., which means we're going to be live again in less than an hour, reviewing photos and taking questions and covering photo news. So every Thursday, this is a special event, but that's a regular event. Let's look at how the E-M5 Mark II compares against a couple of other cameras. When you compare it against, well, the black edition of the E-M1, you see that they're very similar. They're almost the same size and weight. The E-M1 clearly is built to be and feel a little bit sturdier, but the E-M5 Mark II has about the same number of buttons. The E-M1 new is still more expensive, about $300 more expensive, but it's going used for about $900, and of course the E-M5 Mark II is not yet available used. So it's a serious consideration to instead go for the E-M1. However, the E-M1 is more expensive, doesn't have 60 frames a second at 1080p, and has a tilt screen instead of an articulating screen, and it lacks that 40 megapixel still life high resolution feature that I'm so excited about. So to me, I'm going to be picking the E-M5 Mark II over even the big boy, the E-M1. The one thing the E-M1 has is phase detection, but the phase detection focusing does not work with the vast majority of, or any micro four thirds lenses. You have to be using an old 4/3 lens, which nobody really does. So it's kind of a useless feature. Here's a comparison from DP Review again of raw images taken with the E-M1 and the E-M5 Mark II. And to my eye, they're very similar. I don't see any difference in image quality. Compare the E-M10 to the E-M5 Mark II. We can see the E-M5 Mark II has some extra buttons and dials. And in fact, that's really helpful because I always thought the E-M10 needed just a couple other custom function buttons. The E-M5 Mark II addresses that perfectly. Give me other buttons to, say, start bracketing or adjust the ISO. Really useful stuff. The E-M10, really, the E-M10 is the camera I recommend for travel photography, and I will still recommend it because it's substantially lighter than the E-M5 Mark II. And if I'm going micro four thirds, if I'm making the sacrifice of picking that small sensor, I want the camera to be small and lightweight. The E-M10 provides that and still looks great. It only supports 30 frames a second. It's a little bit slower at 8 frames a second or 3.5 frames a second with continuous focus. But it's not a sports camera anyway. The focus tracking just isn't good enough for that kind of thing. And it only has a tilt screen instead of an articulating screen. When you look at the still images side by side, again, they seem very, very similar to me. I don't see that the E-M5 Mark II is any better. This is an unusual comparison, but I want to compare the Sony Alpha 7 to the E-M5 Mark II. And it's unusual because the Sony Alpha 7 is a full frame camera. That means the sensor of this guy 4 times bigger than this guy's sensor. That generally means at a given ISO, the Alpha 7 will be producing images with 1/4 the noise of the E-M5 Mark II. Factor in that the Alpha 7 goes down to ISO 100 instead of ISO 200, and that means that for landscapes, anytime you have sunlight, the Alpha 7 is going to be producing images 8 times cleaner than the E-M5 Mark II. That big full-frame sensor really does make a difference. The Alpha 7 is $1,300 new, so just a couple $100 more than the E-M5 Mark II, but it's going used for $900, so you can pick it up even cheaper. It's going to be a really tough choice to make. Remarkably, even though it's a full-frame camera, it's right about the same weight, right about the same size. Pretty amazing. It has 24 megapixels instead of 16 megapixels, and we'll see a sample image in just a second. It's a slower frame rate of only 4 frames a second, but you can continuously focus during those, so it's more comparable to the 5 frames a second over here. If you really need those 10, you'll have to go for the 5 Mark II. The focusing is superior on the Alpha 7, and it only has a touch screen instead of an articulating screen. And again, if you want to use that 40 megapixel still life mode, which I definitely do, you're going for the Olympus. Looking at the sample images from DP Review, you can see the Alpha 7 is substantially sharper than the E-M5 Mark II. That bigger sensor, more megapixels, definitely brings it to life and produces better images. So let's look at your comments. If you want to send me a comment or a question during the show, during the live broadcast, just tag hashtag TCLive. So I'll jump out and go in here and see if anybody has written anything. Justin, have you seen any tweets come in?
Nothing relevant.
Okay. No questions from you guys, so I will simply call it a day. Thanks so much. Don't forget to subscribe to see the upcoming full real-world review of the E-M5 Mark II, and we'll see you soon. Bye.